Welcome into the late night Gamecock. Oh, this is not the late night Gamecock show. This
Yeah.
is Rooster Rant. Yeah, I feel like a lot of people woke up today and we're just kind of just wanted to move past last night for in Gamecock Nation. Um, and as I opened the show jokingly, yeah, it was kind of weird. You kind of just want to watch this one, spit it out, and Alex, just start off the cuff here. It started an hour and a half after it was
Well,
supposed to.
it was a little bit over 2 hours. I think it was 9:21 was kickoff, I think.
Yeah.
But to your point, yeah, like it was like a lot of, if you're a fan, or like, I think, you probably just wanted to kind of move on from that one. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about with all three phases in that game. It was just, kind of weird overall. You had, as you mentioned, the weird start. That storm was nuts. It kind of just sat there over Williams-Brice. It kind of reminded me of that Missouri 2017 game. I think the Scarnecchia game. But
Yeah.
they got it in. But it's obviously got a lot to talk about here tonight about it.
Yeah, it was one of those games where we've seen across the country starting Thursday night in the NFL where, okay, the game's either suspended while it's being played. We saw that in the upstate yesterday. We saw it in the NFL. I think there was another game, the game in Charlotte today. NFL game got postponed a little bit.
Yeah.
I can't speak to having to sit through a rain delay. I never played a sport outdoors when I was old enough to really not just be limber. But when you hear Chris Collinsworth talk about, you hear the announcers talk about it, and I think, even Shane, if he didn't say in the press conference last night, he might have hinted at it. When you're ready to go for 7 o'clock and then you wait. I wasn't surprised to see a slow start, but we'll talk all about that. Alex, I do want to quickly hit the bullet points here. South Carolina did win the game 38-10. They did not cover the spread. I think the spread ended up being around 40-something
42
at kickoff. 42 at kickoff. But when you look at first downs, South Carolina had 16, South Carolina State 13. The third down efficiency, South Carolina State was 6 of 16, which isn't a terrible number at all, but South Carolina 3 of 12. South Carolina went forward twice on fourth down, got both, but to be out yardaged, however you say it. South Carolina State had 270 total yards and Gamecocks had 253. Yards per pass attempt, South Carolina State 7.4, South Carolina 6.4. Rushing, the Gamecock defense stood up, only 62 rushing yards for South Carolina State, 125 for the Gamecocks. But Gamecocks only averaging 3.5 yards per rush. Penalties again, Alex, 7 penalties for 48 yards. Fumbles lost, interceptions thrown. Gamecocks did win the turnover battle. But South Carolina State possessed this ball almost 35 minutes during this ball game. And then, just looking over some general stats, Lenore Sellers 11 for 19, 128 yards and a touchdown. Definitely, there were some drops. There were some times when he just didn't have time to throw, quite frankly. Dwarn Howell, we like that he got 7 carries against South Carolina State. I'm sure it's a feel-good moment for him. But outside of defense and special teams, I don't think there's a lot to write home for the offense, Alex. We'll talk about all of that right after this introduction to Rooster Rant.
The barnyard's fired up or down in the dumps. Rooster's high, rooster's low. It's college football, don't you know? Either way, let's go. Let's talk about it. Let's scream and shout it. Let's fire everybody fast. So celebrate, it's Rooster Rant. Now here's a late night Gamecock. Matt Anderson and the pride of Hampton County, Alex Jones, and all of you on Rooster Rant.
Well, Alex, here we are, and as crazy it is to say, the Gamecocks have already completed 2 games on their schedule. We all know there's only 12 in a regular season. Time flies, right?
Yeah, I feel like we were just talking about the second scrimmage of preseason camp already. Yeah, time flies, especially once you get into that season and kind of get into the role of a game week and all that. Like, before we know it, we'll be here on Wednesday night on Late Night Gamecock Show getting ready for Vanderbilt. That's getting to be a really interesting game that, obviously we'll talk more about that down the road, but it'll be here before we know it.
Yeah, I think at this point, Alex, might as well just take overall stock and inventory on the Gamecock football team. You have a game, a neutral site in Atlanta against Virginia Tech. I think most Gamecock fans felt at least okay leaving that game. You escape it, you cover, you're 1-0, and you got South Carolina State coming to town. And the old coaching adage, Alex, is that you're never going to get better in the season from game 1 to game 2, right? And that's where you're going to get better. That's your biggest leap, I should say. So, to my eyes, Alex, I didn't see the Gamecocks get better from week 1 to week 2.
Yeah, I think obviously, all the talk, after the game and into today has been about the offense, and just a lot did not go right. Now I think it all kind of starts, with all the talk has been starting up front. Like they didn't just, they get a bad field position to start with on like their first 3 drives, starting within like the 15-yard line. And then just could not get a push in their run game up front. There were really no room to run. And then it just kind of felt like they, hurt themselves with some, self-inflicted penalties. And, that was a lot of kind of what you mentioned off the top with the number of penalties they had. Like, maybe that had to do with, the rain delay and all that. But there was a lot of pre-snap stuff that they got to get cleaned up. And, not only from an offensive standpoint, but then you had some special team stuff where it was illegal formations. And then just the false starts or a few of those early on, they got to get that kind of stuff cleaned up because a team like Vandy will come in and they'll take, advantage of that. But just wasn't a whole lot of room to run. That I think you got yourselves into really obvious passing situations, and even against a team like South Carolina State, that they can make you pay for that. And just early on, just was not a whole lot of time either for the Norris Sellers to throw. So it's going to be interesting to see how everything kind of forms out this week. Obviously, we'll talk about some injuries on the other side of the ball too that happened in that game and kind of going into that game. But that's going to be kind of the talk of this week heading into Vanderbilt.
Yeah, Alex, when I look at Lenore Sellers, and I hear it. I hear the criticism. You don't have to go far to hear it. And for me, I just can't say after 38 pass attempts that I know what this offense is. I can't say I know what Lenore Sellers can be because how many drops can you count off just off the top of your head? I mean, I can think of at least 2 or 3 in Virginia Tech. I'm sure there was 1 or 2 yesterday. Well, yeah, the one where he kind of Patrick Mahomes and kind of flipped it or tried to flip it to Nick Harbor, who was kind of standing out of bounds saying, what the heck? That would have been a first down, another completion. Instead, some incomplete. So right now, Sellers is 23 of 38 with 337 passing yards, a shade over 150, 160 a game, and a 60% completion rate. But Alex, I feel like if you let Lenore set his feet and get his shoulder into it, get his legs into the ball, he's fairly accurate. But all those passes that you see sail high, that's all footwork. That's all he can't get set because he's under duress.
That's what I was going to get to. It kind of felt like when you watched them last night a little bit, kind of early on, especially because they a little bit and kind of early on that second half figured some things out just from driving the ball down the field. But you kind of felt like he felt that pressure early on in that game where some of those throws like that one to Nick Harbor, that was a little bit later in the game, but kind of sailed that one a little bit on Nick Harbor. But I think, just a little bit of feeling the pressure there. And, I think when you looked at, what South Carolina State was doing defensively, they were kind of doing the same thing Virginia Tech. They were just kind of selling out to stop the run. And, some of the things you saw in the Virginia Tech game that South Carolina did was that little tight end dump off pass that worked so many different times. And I think what that does is really stretch the defense out. And, I think, I'm interested to see just from a run game standpoint how that kind of, gets into Vanderbilt because I didn't see it felt like too many outside run opportunities in that game. It felt like a lot of it was kind of diving towards the middle. And then I think, I'm interested to see if they get Lenoris more involved in the run game. So I think, when you get him involved in the run game, that really opens up. I think it helps him, kind of get into the flow of the game as well. But then also, I think it kind of opens up the defense because I think last night there were a few times South Carolina State was just waiting on the opportunities for him to run and sat on it. And but I'm just from a run game standpoint, that's what I'm looking for this week. Is obviously from a up front getting a push, but then also how can they get Lenoris Sellers more in that because. Obviously, we've seen from the end of last year to what he even did in the Virginia Tech game. That's the huge strength of his game.
Yeah, and we're going to keep talking about it. With Lenoris, he's taken 6 sacks, and I don't know how many of them I would say he's taken. I feel like he's been dragged down. But he has 21 carries on the year for 48 yards and a touchdown. But then he's been sacked 6 times for negative 41 yards. So you take those sacks out of it, and Lenoris could very well be averaging 60, 70 yards rushing a game. But Lenoris is at his best when he's being creative. He's not at his best when he's sitting in the pocket. I'm not saying that it means he can't do it. We've seen him plenty of times stick in the pocket and plant his foot and get his shoulder into it and make excellent passes. But when it seems like it's a bull rush every second or third play, any quarterback in the world is going to be kind of looking down before they're looking up and scanning the field. And I think that obviously the Gamecocks have not attacked the middle of the field outside of deep, long passes. But those deep, long passes are the times when Lenoris has time in the pocket. And guess what? Nick's pretty fast, but it takes him a couple seconds to get down there.
Yeah, that's something that, I probably would have liked to see a little bit more yesterday was just those kind of – I'm not going to sit here and say that they're RPOs because those are so hard to tell, but those little quick slants in the middle that you saw on Nick Harbor and Donovan Murphy run against Virginia Tech. I think that really helps kind of back the linebackers off a little bit. And I don't think you saw a whole lot of that last night. It just kind of felt like they're, just trying to see what they can do, trying to really force that run game early on. I think, I think ESPN's Jordan Reed kind of posted the video of that first play of the game. There was a wide open receiver right in the middle of the field, and Lawrence just missed him on that one. So I think there's opportunities, but I think it's just more about getting him back in rhythm. And I think, you saw it in that Virginia Tech game. They kind of got him in the rhythm with some of those early passes, that tight end dump off pass or the slant to Nick Harbor. I think you just want to see that a little bit more to help get him in rhythm. That once he's in rhythm, it feels like that's when he really kind of gets going, just like most quarterbacks.
Yeah, and for Lenoris especially, it seems like when he gets hit a couple times and he makes some throws on the run, he really turns into almost like Morpheus in the Matrix. I mean, it looks like time is moving slow for him. Yeah, I don't know what it is with not letting him use his legs. I don't think they're trying to make him think too much. And it sounds like a complete cop-out, but this offense has been very vanilla. It hasn't necessarily been anything to razzle-dazzle you. I mean, a lot of straight draw, straight zone, nothing to make the defense think.
Yeah, it felt more vanilla last night, just from a overall offensive game plan thing. Like just – they had kind of some little things in there, like the little pitch, the Jared Brown that, probably would have worked, but there was a little bit of, just didn't work. And, fortunately for South Carolina, that ball bounced right back to Jared Brown because that would have been that would have been a horrible turnover there. But there's a little bit of that, but I think you just want to see more of that just because it just feels like when you're watching the game, that you can see this from TV too, that it just feels like the defense is sitting in that middle of that offense right now and waiting for the runs up the middle. And I think that's I keep saying it, but that tight end dump off pass works so well against Virginia Tech just because it put those linebackers in a bind. And I'm interested to see if this week going against Vandy, who's got a good defense that returns everybody from last year, if they bring that out a little bit more and maybe try to air it out with some of those deep passes if they can get the time to do so.
Yeah, I quickly want to go back to something you just mentioned, Alex, and I'm not picking on you or anybody when I say this, but that Jordan Reed video, I watched it, and yeah, it was first play of the game, had a potential for a touchdown, maybe a 95-yard pass, at least a big gain. But I've seen a lot of Gamecock fans, especially on our message board, be very critical of Lenoris for not being able to make that read. Yeah, he should have made that play 100%. But I can show the film of the top 5 quarterbacks for this year's NFL draft, and I can find the same play every single game. They're not perfect.
Yeah, I'm not saying that was an easy throw by any. I mean, because that's an NFL type of throw he would have had to make.
Yeah, that wasn't a gotcha. That was just more of a you can find flaws, but I think that overall Lenoris, when he's had opportunity to be calm, cool, and collective in the pocket, almost every single pass is right on the money. The deep pass to Nick Harbor last night, probably a little bit behind him, but it still drew a pass interference in the end zone. Alex,
was a good one.
Yeah, with the running backs, I mean, I can't tell you anything with this offensive line. I do think that Faison is the most talented running back. I think he has the best ability to, if it's a poor offensive line, to make somebody miss and still peel off a 30-yard gain, as we saw against Virginia Tech. But I think that Attaway is just a much better blocker. And until that offensive line squares things away or the scheme shifts, and I'm not saying this it has to shift dramatically, but you got to twist something. And I just think when that kind of thing happens, something could open up, but who knows?
Yeah, and as the game went on, you saw more. Like I thought, I kind of like what I saw from Matt Fuller too. He had some nice little quick cuts in there, and it just gets downhill, runs hard, and we've seen that from Oscar Attaway too, and Faison too. But I think you see a lot of what they see with Attaway too, kind of getting those first reps, just as you mentioned from a blocking standpoint. But I think he's kind of taking the next step as a runner too. But I think right now with how you grade the running backs, it kind of goes into the same kind of grade with with the offensive line, just because those two go so hand in hand right now. And it's I think we'll learn a lot this week against Vanderbilt in that game. And then coming here on Rooster Rant on Sunday night, that's when we can really kind of grade these first three games. And not saying that we can't right now, but that's just that's going to be a test right there.
Yeah, and the big things I'll say as far as the pass catchers, I think Harbor's been everything you've wanted him to be. I mean, he took the end around last night, drew the PI that he should have been a touchdown in the end zone. He should have 3 touchdowns on the season. So I think Nick Harbor's been everything you've wanted. But I don't understand the lack of using Mazeo Bennett. Mazeo, we've seen him make plays against Alabama. I mean, some of the best teams in the country. And to have 2 catches for 13 yards and 0 catches against Virginia Tech, that's just something where I promise you, in my mind, that's just something on Lenore's not having time to find him. I don't think he can get through multiple reads. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you look deep and then short when you're trying to make your reads. So that makes it hard on everybody right there.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the next step from a passing game standpoint. You're seeing, the step Nick Harbor's taken. Donovan Murphy got the start last night. I think that one shows kind of the trust the coach staff's already built in him to go out there and do it. And he had some nice moments too in there. But as you mentioned, Mazeo Bennett showed what he can do last year in that Alabama game, in the Kentucky game, making big catches. You want to see him get utilized a little bit more. And that's another thing. Kind of this against Vanderbilt, do they kind of get some of these rollouts for Lenore Sellers where you can get these quick hitters to a Mazeo Bennett or something like that? Just kind of get Lenore's out of the pocket, because again, that's where it just feels like the whole offense with Lenore's thrives when he gets going out the pocket and really just puts defenses in the bind. And that's when you can kind of see those. When he's out and get into these scramble drills, that's when these wide receivers can get even more open, just because so many defenders have to pay attention to Lenore's.
And we all know how far Lenore's can throw with just the flick of a wrist. It's pretty bonkers. Alex, talking about the offensive line, I think that's the big bugaboo in the room right now. And look, I'm not an offensive line film grader. I'm not a quarterback film grader. I know that there's something that's not clicking between the offensive line and the quarterback right now. Don't know what it is. I don't know if Lenore should be standing in the pocket and getting decapitated each play, or if he's supposed to be moving out of the pocket. I don't know what's a design run that the defense blows up and it just doesn't look like a design run. We don't know the play calls. But Alex, I think you had a really good point last night when we were texting, and it's something that we've talked about before, but it just really echoed with me. But the offensive line's definitely not performing up to their star rating, their experience level. But you said it best. They're not getting any help in the scheme.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of talking about earlier. Just sound like, it just feels like when you're watching it, they're blocking the guys in front, then the linebackers are just sitting there waiting in the gaps. And I feel like if you can just kind of, and I just what I'm saying with those outside run type of things, and being a little bit more creative from a run game perspective, it's going to not force those linebackers to sit there and wait. And that's where I think Lenore's getting out into the run game too can help that too, because those linebackers just kind of feels like right now through those first 2 games, when you sit there and watch them, it feels like they're right up at the line of scrimmage, kind of waiting right there for those inside runs, which is creating no room to run.
Yeah, I agree with you. But with these tight formations as well, it's allowing teams to play 8 in the box. So when you hand it off and you're not really showing the threat of a play action, I haven't seen that many play actions so far out of South Carolina. There's nothing to do but for the entire defense to attack at that standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, that Nick Harbor was a play action that went for
Yeah.
a touchdown against Virginia Tech in that little
Yeah.
diamond formation. So, yeah, I mean, it's shown its work. It works.
Yeah, I would like to see some more movement behind the line of scrimmage from the offense, figuring out where the defense is in better and just seeing where you can attack. But Alex, at the end of the day, we said it. I said it. I'm not going to run away from it. People I trust told me this offensive line was 8 to 10 deep. They told me it was the most competitive offensive line that the Gamecocks have had in a long time. And I said it again and again. I'd have to see it to believe it. And right now I'm not seeing it. But Alex, what can we even come up with that's wrong right now outside of it just seems like they're not connected, not communicated. There's a breakdown every play. Do you think it's skill level so far?
I'm not sure, to be honest. And I know that's not giving an answer, but it's just what, I think the offensive line is one position where, if one person doesn't do their job, it makes the whole offensive line look bad. So if one person gets blown up on a play and sacked, the whole offensive line ends up getting blamed. And that's just how it is. All five have to do their job on every play, and just feels like just hasn't been. And Shane Beamer kind of talked about this tonight. There's just got to be more consistency there, and he's mentioned that. And just I think that's the next step. There's a lot of steps they got to take right now, but just that play in, play out consistency. That's I think the big thing now.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull it up too. I want to look at do you have the snap here? There's snap count. I'm pulling it up now.
Yeah.
Because there was some shuffling at offensive line last night. Do you have it handy? Because it's pretty slow right now on my side.
Well, yeah, I'll pull it up.
Here we go. All right, offensive line, I got it.
Well, I'll just go ahead and start. The one move that
go ahead. Josiah Thompson.
Yeah, that was the move in the second half that they made. Josiah Thompson, I think, got a little bit banged up. So they put Jatavius Shivers in, and on his first job, they did move the ball. They got some things going down the field, and I've always kind of liked Jatavius Shivers. Just it seems like when his number is called, things have worked out. I mean, think back to that Alabama game last year when Case and Henry went down to injury. They he got in there and they kind of did some shuffling, and it felt like some things moved. So that's kind of interesting. See what do they do there from that standpoint? Do they kind of make some changes on the offensive line from a personnel standpoint? And I don't know. I'm not going to act like I sit here and have heard that they're going to do that. But that's just, I was intrigued that Jatavius Shivers was the first one in there because, obviously I think the questions out there is kind of what's going on with Tree Babalade. And, that's kind of one of the curious questions right now. And obviously, Shane Beamer was asked about it tonight. And he said, I'm pulling up the quote right now. He said, Tree's healthy. We have a lot of confidence in Tree. Tree's a really good player and brings a lot of value to this team. We've had the five out there that we feel like gives us the best chance to be successful. There's kind of like a follow-up question to that, and having three sets of offensive linemen in the game and Tree not getting in is he that far behind? And Shane Beamer said, I wouldn't say that it was three. And he said, no, he's absolutely not that far behind. He's absolutely one of our top guys. Just didn't feel like last night was the right moment to put him in the game. So it's just, it's really interesting. That's kind of everybody's been talking about Tree and if he can get in there. And so we'll see moving forward if he gets more opportunities.
Yeah, there's something that's fishy there. I don't know what it is. And I'm not going to speculate like Alex isn't, but this offensive line still hasn't been the five that we thought would start every single game, and it's not the five that we thought would start or play all eight quarters so far. But we didn't think that last night the Gamecocks would. They took control in the second half, but let's just say 38-10, the way it was scored was not on our bingo card. Alex, really quick, let's talk defense. In my opinion, the front seven hasn't skipped a beat. I think that they all look big, strong, athletic, fast. They attack the football. I really enjoy watching them play. The secondary, I mean, do you disagree with anything I said there, Alex?
No, and just to kind of, I obviously get into the secondary, and it wasn't too much last night to complain about from a defensive standpoint. There were a couple plays where it was again, just making 50-50 plays. And SC State or South Carolina State just had some really good plays on there. But Dylan Stewart was Dylan Stewart. I mean, he lit that running back up on that one play. It was causing problems all night. Brian Thomas had a really good night. Had 3 quarterback hurries, a sack, 4 tackles, I think. They named him defensive player of the game. So defensively, there wasn't too much there. Like that starting group still hasn't given up a touchdown this season so far. The question now, or with linebackers too, like you didn't see much from linebackers last night, but that was not a game where you're going to see linebackers put up big stats just because they were really getting the ball out quick to the perimeters and trying to just get the ball downfield. But those guys played fine too. You saw those guys flash. The secondary is where now the depth is getting tested a little bit. Jalen Kilgore didn't play last night. I think we'll see there. But Brandon Cisse also went out with an injury. Like he and Brian Thomas had a pretty big collision in the backfield, and then he went out and then didn't come back in. And I don't think I saw him on the sidelines either. But Shane Beamer tonight, just to kind of overall from an injury standpoint, he said we're better today than I thought we might be last night. Feel pretty optimistic on everyone as we sit here today in regards to being able to play against Vanderbilt. So we'll see there. They'll have obviously Shane will talk again on Tuesday. And then the SEC injury report comes out on Wednesday, and that's updated Thursday, Friday, and then the Saturday before game time. But then you saw the depth get tested there. So Miles Norwood got a lot of playing time in there. Bakari Swain, after his 2 punt touchdowns, I think there was maybe Shane said he was a little banged up and wasn't able to return. But I felt like we'll see there with him too. But the depth there now is getting tested a little bit because then Jaquel Holman, one of their backup nickels, went down and had a sling on the sideline too. So the depth's getting tested there. I think you still feel good. The safeties, I think DQ and Peyton Williams have been really good through 2 games, kind of just doing their jobs and doing it at a pretty high level. But now we'll see just from this cornerback standpoint, just because Judge Collier obviously got injured last week and he had a brace and crutches yesterday at the game.
Yeah, and I wouldn't read too much into the brace and crutches. Obviously, it's not good. You rather be in a walking boot or something like that. But sometimes it just really is best to immobilize it as much as possible throughout a day, and especially when you can't prop your foot up because you're on the sidelines. It's something that you just want to make sure you're good there. I have no injury update outside of what Alex said. I think that the Gamecocks need to hope for the best because even the guy we're going to talk about next, Bakari Swain, after returning, setting the Gamecocks up to win the game. I guess I didn't see him come up limp or anything like that. I have no idea what happened for the second half, but he was not in the game. But what can you say about Bakari Swain right now, Alex?
Yeah, it's incredible. And I mean, the first one was it's just, you saw, we mentioned this last week, you saw that in his high school film, he can do this type of stuff. And then that was just a great play on the second one after the block punt from David Busey, got his hand on it and tipped it. Shane Beamer again talked about last night that he made the right play there going after that ball. Even when it was, just sitting there rolling and players all around it, he made the right call, got it. And I think it just caught South Carolina State so off guard and his speed really just overtook in that thing. I mean, it's pretty incredible. Another note on that, Shane Beamer was asked tonight, if Jalen Kilgore and Bakari Swain are healthy, is Swain your punt returner? He said yes. So, you're going to be seeing Swain, and that's not a surprise. I mean, you got returns 3 touchdowns in 2 games. That he's going to be back there as your punt returner. But, I mean, it's incredible. I mean, they've needed that spark in both games, really, and he's come up for it.
Yeah, it's one of those things where do you give him the Devin Hester treatment? Do you just not punt to him? Because it's clear, man, he makes that one person miss, and then he finds that wall, and then you are not stopping him from getting the end zone once he gets that wall. He will push his own blocker down.
Yeah, they're making life pretty difficult for punt teams now, just because every time they're going out to punt, they're going to have the thought of, okay, they're going to come after this and block it, and they've shown that they can block punts at South Carolina. But now you got a guy back there who's electric in Bakari Swain who can go out there and return a punt at any time for a touchdown. So there's just a lot of pressure being put on opposing punt teams, and that's part of the game, and they're taking full advantage of it right now.
Yeah, I think that I'm still okay with Joyce as the field goal kicker. He's 8 for 8 on extra points, and he's 2 of 3 on field goals. And the one he missed, he rebounded well. He drilled a 49-yarder last night. The one he missed, Alex, it looked like, I was watching on TV. I didn't go to the game last night after everything transpired with the weather, and I just been traveling a lot. But But anyway, Alex, golly, where am I going with Joyce? Joyce, he looked like he kind of held his hamstring coming off the field. I don't know if he tweaked something, pulled something as he was trying to kick it, but seemed okay later on.
Yeah, I missed that if he did. But, I mean, yeah, like you said, he seemed fine on that. I mean, he nailed that 49-yarder, so it seems like everything's good there.
Yeah, overall thoughts, Alex, there's 8 touchdowns for South Carolina through 2 games, and only 4 of them have come offensively. That's something that obviously is going to have to improve, but it's a good thing. I mean, it's not going to happen you're not going to get a defensive score and a special team score every game. But just the fact that the defensive special teams are capable of doing that, that's great because that could happen in any given game. Offense has got to pick it up. Alex, it sounds like a cop-out, I know, but truthfully, how much of this playbook do you think we've seen? Not based on what anyone's told you or anyone said, oh, we're holding stuff back for Vandy, but it just seems like the same plays over and over. There has to be more in the playbook.
I agree. I do feel like there's more out there, and you have to imagine it's going to be this week that you see it. You know, if there is indeed more, just because you're going to need it against Vanderbilt. I mean, I've mentioned it before, and we'll talk more Vanderbilt here later in the week. But it's a good defense, and they're going to have to bring their A game.
Yeah, and it's almost like you scratched and clawed through 2 of these games now, and you've won both of them. And there are some teams out there that win ugly, and they find a way, right? And right now, looking at South Carolina's schedule, you have Vanderbilt coming to Williams-Brice this coming weekend, 7:45 kickoff. Then you travel on the road to Missouri. We'll talk a little bit about Missouri here in a bit. And then after that, you have Kentucky at home. Kentucky seems to have one or two of those games at home, Alex, where they just stay competitive, stay close to the team they shouldn't. Maybe that's what happened with Ole Miss, or maybe Ole Miss played down a little bit at Kentucky and we've given Ole Miss a little bit too much credit. But those 3 games, man, Vanderbilt, Missouri, and Kentucky, then you have the bye week. So you better improve a lot between weeks 2 and 3 with Vanderbilt coming to town. And then you hope you carry that through because Alex, right now, if I'm judging South Carolina, 60% on what I saw last night and 40% on what I saw against Virginia Tech, outside of Coastal, man, from what I've seen, I can't say any of those games are a for sure win.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying with this Vanderbilt game is when you'll get a really good feel for it and what this team is. And, maybe they, like we mentioned earlier, that week 1 to week 2 jump is what you always see. Maybe for South Carolina, it's going to be the week 2 to week 3 jump. Well, we don't know. They're going to need a big jump, and we'll see. From defensive standpoint, I think it's just kind of continue what you're doing. Defense and special teams. I don't think there's too much to complain about by those 2 units. It's just staying healthy, really defensively. And then it's offensively, just getting some things figured out. Kind of tailoring more to what Lenore's does so well and things outside the pocket that we touched on earlier. So that's kind of the next steps there, and that's what's going to lead to what they can reach their potential and ceiling.
Yeah, I mean there are positive things to point out. Harrison's all over it. I mentioned this on the Big Spur today, but 0 turnovers through 8 quarters. That was a major point of emphasis for Shane over the course of the offseason. I think if he gave an interview, he talked about it. And it's a situation, Alex, where I wouldn't say the Gamecocks have beaten themselves in the 2 games. Obviously, they haven't lost, but they haven't given up that 50-yard interception for a touchdown. No. They haven't put the ball on the ground. So there's something to be said for that. And the sacks, I mean, although it seems like Lenore's is back there, just fighting for his life, only 6 through 2 games. I think last year at this point it was like 18.
Yeah, probably. I mean, that's kind of thing. Just the no turnovers. That's huge. Just because that was one of the things we talked about with not only the offense, but especially with Lenore's and some just continue to improve from a handling the ball standpoint inside the pocket, and they haven't had any issues there. And so that's one of the bright spots for the offense right now. That's something to build on, but there's obviously still a lot to build on there.
Yeah, and the 3 and outs, and Matt mentioned it here in the chat as well. The 3 and outs are not good at all, and it kind of goes back to that Illinois game. I don't know what to say. I mean, I really am. I'm not covering for anybody, but I cannot imagine this is Mike Shula's offense he wants to run.
last night, the biggest problem with those 3-and-outs was they just weren't getting ahead on the chains. Like it was getting to the point where there was early on those they got to be better on first and second downs. That's what's going to get the offense going. I know that sounds obvious, but that's just got what they have to do because they're getting, you saw it in the Virginia Tech game, but you really saw it last night, especially on those early downs or early in the game where, I mean, they just were playing from a 3rd and 10, or they'd have one of those, self-inflicted wounds from a focus thing where you have a pre-snap penalty or a false start or a snap infraction, something like that. That's one of the biggest things that killed them last night was they're just playing so far behind the chains. And again, even if it's South Carolina State, that's a team. I mean, against any team, if you're playing behind the chains, it gets obvious what you're doing. It can be easy to defend.
Yeah, and that's why I really admired Iowa's offensive line. I was watching a lot of that game yesterday. It was a 12 o'clock game, Iowa versus Iowa State. And, I mean, those boys were big and strong. And, yeah, they whiffed a couple of times or someone blew an assignment. But I just kept thinking to myself, if Sellers had that offensive line, what a world of difference it could be for the entire team. But that is what it is, y'all. That's where the Gamecocks stand. We did say we were going to talk about a couple other games here, Alex. I know that you and I both were very interested in the Vanderbilt at Virginia Tech game. At the end of the first quarter, VT was up 10-0. Then it was 10-10 at halftime. And then Vanderbilt scored 24 unanswered points in the second half to run away with it. There's no doubt in my – go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, VT was up 20-10 at halftime. Then it was a 34.
Yeah, 20-10.
Yeah.
They
completely shut down Virginia Tech in the second half. And, I mean, I credit them for second half adjustments. That was something apparently Virginia Tech just did not adjust to, and they ran away with it.
Yeah, they ran up 490 yards of offense against Virginia Tech, and they only gave up 248. So they almost outgained them by 2. But then, the third down efficiency for Vanderbilt, 5 of 7 and 1 of 1 on fourth down conversions. Look, Pavia has the type of offense too that I think a lot of Gamecock fans would like to see, where he's not asked to throw the ball 40 times a game. There's going to be pre-snap motion. There's going to be dudes whizzing around everywhere. He's going to whiz around everywhere. And at the end of the day, he's averaging like 12 yards of completion. Granted, one of those games was against Charleston Southern. But even looking at this box, I think he still averaged over 10 yards the pass attempt. So it's going to be something to monitor. We're going to break this whole game down. But for the first time in 17 years, I think that for South Carolina, I would be kind of worried about Vanderbilt coming to Williams-Brice Stadium.
Yeah, I mean, they've really nailed down that offense. I mean, Pavia runs it perfectly for Jerry Kill and those guys. Like Cedric Alexander's a really good running back. Then you got Eli Stowers, who's got a good chance to be one of the first tight ends taken off the board in this year's draft. So, we'll dive more into Vanderbilt this week. But, the speed of South Carolina's defense is something that I think is going to play key into this. Like, you talked about earlier how, this wasn't really a linebackers game against South Carolina State, just from a statistical standpoint, just because they – some of the stuff South Carolina State was doing, just getting the ball out quick. But it's going to be key in this game, the linebackers, Fred Johnson and those guys, just because there's so much motion and kind of eye candy they put into it. You got to be really disciplined in gap schemes and stuff like that. And I think that's some of the reasons you saw Virginia Tech kind of lose guys. And I know there's probably like a 45-yard touchdown pass or so from Pavia, or just wide open guy out in the field. So it's just going to be, you got to be disciplined. And I think that's going to be a big talking point for Clayton White this week.
Yeah, I think so too. Alex, Gamecocks did fall one spot I saw in the media poll. So the Gamecocks did drop to number 11 in the country. I do think that drop was warranted, just like I think Clemson's drop to number 12 was warranted. Mm-hmm. Both teams in both major programs in South Carolina stunk it up yesterday for the most part. Thank God South Carolina was never in the situation Clemson was against Troy, because that could have been disastrous up in the upstate. But yeah, this Vanderbilt game, Alex, we're going to talk about it all next week. I'm trying to think, what would you put the spread on the game? For me, go ahead. Do you have a number, Alex?
Well, I was going to tell you what the number is right now.
Okay, let me guess the number. Let me guess the number.
Yeah.
I don't know yet. I'm going to say Gamecocks minus 1.5. What is it?
7.5 to 8 right now.
South Carolina favored.
Yeah. I think I think I've seen 8.5, but I think most recently when I saw it 7.5 to 8 right now, and we'll see if that moves. I don't think it is as we sit here right now, but that's where it is right now. And that I was kind of thinking in that range, to be honest, going into it, because I saw an early line before the game last night that was sitting South Carolina 8.5 or so for that one. So we'll see, but I wonder. That's going to be interesting to watch this week if that line moves, based on injuries and things like that.
I really did think with the injuries and with the way South Carolina played comparatively against Vanderbilt, against Virginia Tech, that line. I mean, I could have seen 3.5, 2.5, but after what I've seen so far, if it's 8.5, I might be taking Vanderbilt in our best bet segment next week. Not that I think Carolina's going to lose, but 8.5 is a lot of points. So we'll see. Well, Alex, John Mateer at Oklahoma. I still don't know how good Michigan is, but from the 2 games he's played, he's passed the test. So he looks to be every bit of one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC.
Yeah, I mean, 2 quarterbacks that I thought were really good yesterday were John Mateer and Bo Pribula. I think Bo Pribula threw for some 300-some yards yesterday, and that was an interesting game to watch kind of before Carolina's game got underway, just because Kansas got off to a really good start, which surprised me. I'm interested to watch Missouri's defense now because I thought it was going to be a little bit better than that. But, I mean, Jalen Daniels, Kansas is a really good quarterback, and there's some things that they did there. But, Bo Pribula has really stepped up and I think, taken on that challenge. And they moved the ball pretty well, so that's down the road, but going to be keeping an eye on them.
Yeah, and then we talked about it earlier, the Ole Miss Kentucky game. Kentucky gave Ole Miss everything they wanted to start the game, but Ole Miss eventually got back control of that game. And despite the 7-point final score, I feel like from the halfway point of the second quarter on, Ole Miss was the better team. But this is where it gets fun, Alex. We're kind of running out of non-conference games. I mean, go ahead.
I think the one game we got to talk about happened in Gainesville.
They're not on the schedule, so I wasn't going to bring it up.
Oh, okay. All right. That's fair.
But hey, hats off to South Florida. I can't say I was utterly surprised by that outcome. I've been saying it on my show, on every show I go on. DJ Lagway is going to have to show me he's a program savior before I believe it. And yesterday was not his best outing, and neither was it for Billy Napier.
Yeah, and I'm not saying this to disrespect South Florida, but that was one of the easier games on Florida's schedule just because of how difficult their schedule is. They got LSU, they got Texas. Their next 4 games consist of LSU, Texas, Miami, I think Texas A&M. It's going to be interesting to watch Gainesville just because it's got a chance to get really interesting now because that was a game they had to have, and obviously this next 4 games could really tell the tale there.
Absolutely. Well, Alex and I, we're going to get out of here. We'll be back on Wednesday. Just a heads up, this upcoming Wednesday, Justin has a prior commitment, so he won't be there to make fun of me and Alex's best bets. But we're excited to be back Wednesday. We'll break down Vanderbilt, and we will tell you everything you need to know. So excited for that. Well, for Alex and myself, thank you all so much for listening tonight, watching tonight. When you spend your time with us, you give us the most valuable thing you have. So we thank you for it. If we can ever help you guys in any way, let us know. And until Wednesday, see you soon. Bye, everyone.